My name's Andy Weir, and I'm the author of The Martian, Artemis, and Project Hail Mary. I recently watched your video on binding Dune, and that sent me down a rabbit hole of binging your videos. I was really impressed with your stuff, especially Dune, of course, and also your D&D manuals. That was really cool. So basically what I was hoping for would be for you to come up with some custom versions of my books for me. You can have total creative control over the covers. They can look however you like. Anyway, let me know if that's something you'd be able to do. I know it would take a long time, but I look forward to seeing what you'd come up with.
Okay, I'm gonna need just a second to process this. Andy Weir, if you haven't heard of him, is one of the biggest names in science fiction writing out there today. If you haven't read his books, then you've probably seen the movie based on his first one, The Martian. You know, Matt Damon sciencing himself off of Mars? That Andy Weir. Anyway, he's one of my favorite authors. I've read all 3 of his books multiple times, and in fact, I just finished rereading his latest one, Project Hail Mary. So, for him to reach out to me, a guy in a shed making YouTube videos, it's pretty cool. But at the same time, it is a little bit daunting. I mean, he just came off watching my Dune rebinding, so he's going to have some expectations. And he's not asking me to make just one custom book, but 3. So I'm really going to have to put some thought into this if I decide to do it. And of course I'm going to do it. I mean, come on. It's Andy Weir. And you know, there's a couple of techniques that I've been meaning to try out that I could put into practice on this project. You know, come up with something new that he hasn't seen before. In fact, I've already got a few ideas bouncing around in my head, but before I get ahead of myself, I think I need to get those ideas out of my head and onto paper so I can really flesh them out. That means off to the drawing board. My main goal at this stage was to find a way to have the 3 books feel related. Not so much a set, but a family, sharing some common elements. With that to guide me, I let my mind and my pencil wander, just putting my impressions from the books onto paper. This gave me the freedom to explore ideas, sketching and leaving some while returning to expand on others. After my initial brainstorming session, I focused in on each book individually, taking inspiration from photos where I could. At this point, I wasn't trying to finalize the designs, I just wanted to get a solid direction, which would allow me to start ordering some materials. Further refinements could be made along the way. Once I got my general course set, it was time to put down my pencil and get the mission underway for real. So here I've got all 3 of Andy Weir's works. I've got The Martian, his first book obviously, Artemis, and his latest book, Project Hail Mary. If I'm going to rebind these, I think I'm going to have to take a good look at them and see how they're put together, because my job is going to be to take them apart. Size-wise, they're almost all the same height. Project Hail Mary is a little bit larger than The Martian and Artemis, so I'm going to have to trim that down because I want all 3 books to match completely in size. How about the construction though? If we take a look here at the headbands, we can get an idea of how the books are put together. Maybe you can see the pages were initially gathered into signatures, but on this copy of The Martian, they look like they've been split at the back. It's a little less obvious here on Artemis. On my copy of Project Hail Mary, you can see the headband is already coming away from the text block, and you can see that the signatures have been split all the way along so that this hot melt adhesive can key down in between the pages. That's how pretty much every hardcover book is made these days, and these aren't sewn at all. So I'm going to see what I can do to improve upon that. Inside we've got some maps and illustrations. Those shouldn't be too hard to preserve because they're well in from the end papers and the fly leaves. All the end papers are plain, so I don't have to worry about trying to salvage those. I won't be needing these dust jackets, so I can get rid of those. As I said before, I want to make sure that there's a continuity of design in my versions. It should be apparent just by looking at them that they belong together, but at the same time, each one should be unique. There's nothing worse than books in a series with mismatching designs. I've got a long way to go before I get to that though, so I guess I'd better get started and get these books out of their covers. I'm being careful not to damage the text blocks, so I cut 1 centimeter or so back from the hinge and then I peel up the paste downs. I'm leaving that little flap for now just out of an abundance of caution. It'll probably get removed later. It looks like some adhesive squeezed out onto the spine stiffener, so I'll just break that away. With the book shucked out of the case, you can see the craft paper spine lining. I'll deal with that later. Spine lining and end bands are practically falling off of this one already. I can do better, I think. I want to get down to see the construction of the spine, and that means stripping away that spine lining. I suspect that will require a little bit of heat and quite a lot of patience. All too often I've seen this type of binding fail, so removing this glue and replacing it with something stronger is, in my mind, a necessary step. So it's as I suspected, there's no sewing here at all, and all the signatures have been split through except at these little gaps. Those are the only places where the paper is still whole. And unlike with my Dune binding, this book isn't damaged at all, it's brand new. So I don't have to actually repair any of these sheets, but I do want to give this text block some additional strength, so I'm going to have to think about how to do that. While I think I can get the glue off of the other 2 text blocks. That being said though, getting every bit of glue off isn't practical, and in fact what remains will be enough to hold the text blocks together while I continue to work on them. Well, I got all 3 books out of their covers, and just as I suspected, there's not a stitch of thread in there anywhere. Can't win them all, I guess. But while I was working on those, it gave me a bit of an idea. You see, these are case bindings, which means that the text block and the cover are made separately, and then they get put together at the end, something like that. So what if I keep these as case bindings, but reinforce the spines so that they're stronger than new, and then I can focus on making some really excellent covers that'll look great on Andy Weir's shelf. While I'm at it, I can dress up the 4 edges so those look great too. It's a pretty good plan, so I think that's what I'm going to go with, and hopefully I'll be able to come up with something that looks a little bit better than just that. There may not be any thread in these bindings, but that doesn't mean that I can't add some. But instead of sewing, I'll make a series of kerf cuts across the spine with a saw. Into those kerfs, I'll glue strands of linen thread, which is the same stuff that I usually sew my books with. Once glued in, this will effectively lock all the pages together, and with what's left of the original adhesive, should be more than strong enough. I'll then line the spine with paper again, and it'll be better than new. Not quite as robust as a fully sewn binding, but it has the advantage of being faster, and with 3 books to bind, that sounds like a good plan to me. I'm laying out my cuts every inch or so where the signatures have been split. Where the paper's intact, I'm going to leave that alone. I'll put a little PVA glue into the kerf and then insert a doubled piece of thread. Wiggling it back and forth helps to spread the glue evenly. I'll make sure it's well seated with my bone folder, and then I'll give it a bit more glue for good measure. I've used this technique to bind loose pages without sewing, and it's quite effective. The first lining is a lightweight washi-kozo paper, which I'll attach with some PVA glue. Tamping it down with a stiff brush forces the thin paper down into the rough texture, which ensures good contact. This does pull the paper fibers up a bit, but at this point that's not a problem. Later I'll add additional layers of paper to finish the spine. Okay, those are all reinforced, so it's time to move on to trim the books so that they're all the same size. Then I can get the edges prepped for the decoration, and what I've got in mind is to do edge marbling. I'll do a custom pattern for each of the 3 books, and then I'll do the same pattern on the end papers on the inside so that everything matches. There is a bit of a problem with that though, because I can't trim the books until the end papers are attached, because I want those to be trimmed to the same size, and then the edges of the end papers will get marbled along with everything else. But I can't do that until I go and make the marbled paper, bring it back here, make the end papers, and attach them to the books. You see where I'm going. So I need the end papers. I don't really have a choice, and I can't trim these until I got them. So I guess it's off to the studio to do some marbling. We won't spend much time down here, but I did want to show you the process. If you're interested, I have a whole playlist of paper marbling videos, which I'll link to in the description. The short explanation of what I'm doing is that I'm dropping paint onto a thickened bath, and then working the floating paint around into the pattern that I want. When I've got it just right, I'll lay a sheet of paper onto it to pick up the design. This print is one of many that I did in developing a pattern for the Martian. I didn't film it all, but I actually spent several days doing this, custom mixing paints and experimenting with techniques until I homed in on what I wanted. The print I'm making here will be the one that I ultimately select for the Martian. In the days that followed, I worked up patterns for the other two books. Artemis was fairly straightforward, as I was going for a mostly monochrome cratered look. Even so, I made several versions. For Project Hail Mary, I wanted to create something that evoked deep space. This palette of bright colors may not look it, but looks can be deceiving. I'll be making these prints on black paper, so my hope is that these bright colors will give the impression of a nebula once they're on a dark background. I do a test strip, and it looks promising. That's a pretty good result. I'll keep at it though, and I'll see if I can really dial it in. So here are the finished papers all dry and pressed. The Martian design evokes rust-red sand, winding canyons, and exposed outcrops. Artemis is a crater-pocked landscape of lunar dust and rock. And finally, Project Hail Mary's pattern is like a deep space image of a distant nebula. Up close, the tiny flecks of paint give the impression of individual stars. I think these look great now, and they'll be even better once I get them made into end papers. To get started on that, I make a little window template to select the parts of the larger sheets that I want. I'll slide it around until I find the sections that I like, then I'll cut them down to size. I like this diagonal part of the nebula design for Project Hail Mary, and I should be able to get two pieces that are fairly similar out of the one larger sheet. If you like the look of these, I've actually scanned them at high resolution and made them available as digital downloads on my Patreon page. You can print them up to use in your own projects, or use them as a background so you can just pixel peep all the details. Either way, you can say that you own a bit of Project Hail Andy. Again, I'll put a link to that in the video description. The next step is to burnish the marbled papers. Burnishing deepens the colors and gives the paper a soft luster. A light application of beeswax is followed by repeated polishing with an agate burnisher. Doing this compresses the paper fibers and enhances the durability. This isn't an absolutely necessary step, but I think it adds to both the visual and tactile appeal. Put side by side, you can see the soft shine left by the burnishing. For the black base papers, I chose to use a microcrystalline wax instead of the beeswax. I was concerned that the beeswax might look hazy against the dark background. This is more like a solvent-based paste wax, and it needs to dry a little bit after I apply it with a cotton pad. In sewn bindings, I prefer to use what are called made end papers, which are sewn directly into the text block. In this case, I can't do that, but I still want the end papers to be robust. To that end, I'm preparing a few strips of Kozo paper, which I'll glue to the back of the marbled papers along the folds. The Kozo paper can be torn along the moistened lines, and that leaves a feathered edge that will blend in when glued down. Later, I decided that this wasn't worth the effort, and I cut some strips instead. But for now, we'll carry on with these. Once folded, I decide which papers will go on the front and back of the book, and then I mark them appropriately. I'll glue one half of the Kozo strips to attach to the folded marbled paper, leaving the other half of the guard strip free. That'll become part of the hinge when the books are eventually pasted into their covers. My hope is that this will make for a sort of hybrid made/tipped-in end paper. You could call it a guarded end paper maybe. Normally, I'd apply glue to the marbled paper first, but I had some concern about those feathered edges not matching up to a clean line of glue, so I chose to glue the strips first. As I said, I'd changed my mind partway through, as I decided that the thin paper would basically disappear under the paste down anyway, feathered edge or not. That, and these near weightless little strips, were kind of a pain. Here I've changed my approach, and I glued the folded papers first, and then I attached them to cut strips of Kozo, which was far less trouble. Those are basically dry already, but I'll leave them under some weight for good measure anyway. The next step is to add a colored flyleaf to complete the end paper construction. This red paper is the same stuff that I used in my medieval binding series way back. I think it's some type of washi paper, but as I got it in a bulk lot, I don't really know. It's got an inside and an outside, so I'll take care how I attach it to the marbled paper. Watching this now, I realized that I could have folded the colored paper the other way and glued the two parts with the folds aligned, rather than one inside the other as I'm doing here. I think I was focused on gluing the correct side of the red paper. It made no difference really, but I thought I'd point it out. Of course, I followed suit and made the other end papers the same way. Before attaching those to the text blocks, I fold one leaf of the colored paper around to the outside. These will act as protective waste papers throughout the binding process, and they'll be removed before casing in. Finally, the assembled end papers get tipped onto the text blocks with a narrow strip of PVA. Afterwards, I'll place them under some weights to dry. Well, that was a lot of work, but I'm glad I did it because these are looking really good. They're really starting to look more like custom books rather than something you just pick up off the shelf. Now I'm ready to move on to getting these trimmed out so they're all the same size and getting the edges prepped so I can move on to the decoration. I do have to be careful though, because at this stage, if I screw things up, I can't just pick up another off the shelf and start over. I gotta go back to square one. So, fingers crossed. So having measured these up, the Martian is the shortest at 231 millimeters. Artemis is the narrowest at 153. And Project Hail Mary is quite a bit larger in both the height and width. Luckily, it's got fairly good margins, so I'm going to have to cut this one down. Artemis is going to need a little bit of a trim on the top, and the Martian is going to need the forage trimmed. So a little bit of trimming on each of them, but that should get them all into the same size. Before I do that though, I'll just trim off the end papers where they're overhanging at the head and tail, so I can see where to measure from. As each book needs to be trimmed slightly differently, I'll carefully lay out some reference marks on each one. The Martian only needs the foredge trimmed, as it's the shortest of the three books. Artemis will get trimmed to the same height as the Martian, and I'll make just one cut at the tail as the margins are widest there. Project Hail Mary will get trimmed to match Artemis in width and the Martian in height. With a little luck, all three will end up exactly the same. Most of the accuracy of the cut depends on getting the book properly lined up in the press, so I triple check that I've got it all straight. The trimming gets done with this tool called a plow. I'm often asked where I got it. I presume because folks want to get one of their own. The answer is that I bought it secondhand at an estate sale, which isn't much help if you're in the market for one. Maybe when I'm all done with Project Hail Andy, I'll measure up my press and plow and post some plans for them. For now though, I need to focus on my trimming. I take my time with this, turning the handle about a quarter turn or less with each pass to cut through just 1 or 2 sheets at a time. If you look at the nut just above the blade, it looks like I'm doing 1/6 turns. Small, but it goes pretty quickly once I get a rhythm going. It's also important that I clear out any stray bits of paper, which can cause the plow to ride up and change the cutting angle. The trimmings often ride over the blade, which doesn't impact the cut, but I'll still pause to clear them out from time to time. Well, it looks like I did all the measuring and trimming right. Those look great. Tomorrow, I'll get started on prepping them for edge decoration. A fair bit of prep needs to happen before the page edges can be marbled. I want to make sure that they're all perfectly smooth and sealed to give me the best chance at a good finish. The flip side of my press, of course, is the perfect tool for the job. The metal jaws apply even pressure right up to the edge, which I'll need for sanding. As the edges are pretty smooth already, I'll start with a medium 220 grit sandpaper, and I'll work my way up to 800 grit. I use a little sanding block to apply even pressure. With the text block clamped so firmly in the press, the paper responds to the sandpaper much like wood. Just a few passes with each grit is all that's needed. The dust and any loose grit then gets brushed away between stages. That's all 3 edges of the Martian done, so now time to do the same to Artemis. The one remaining factory edge on Project Hail Mary was a bit rougher, so I dropped down to 120 grit sandpaper to start. After that, I work my way up as I did with the others. Edge marbling is a tricky business, and doing so on paper of unknown quality and composition, I want to give myself the best possible chance of success. So to that end, I'm going to seal the page edges using a paste wash. This is simply a watered down version of wheat starch paste. I'll paint it on sparingly to the sanded page edges. The strong pressure from the press keeps the moisture from seeping down into the text block. While the Martian dries a bit, I'll try doing the other 2 books at the same time in my shop-made wooden press. My hope is that this will seal up any tiny imperfections in the paper and improve the chances of my paint sticking. I can then go back to the Martian to do another edge. Looking at it now, I could have put all of them into the wooden press and done them all at the same time. Even so, it didn't take long going back and forth between the 2. One benefit of using my lightweight wooden press is that I can spin it around to do the other sides without having to remove the books. Once dry, the Martian and Artemis are ready for marbling, but Project Hail Mary needs a little bit more work. I want the edges to match the end papers, so in order to do that, I need to give them a base color. This is a thinned black acrylic paint, which I brush on in a couple of coats. After 10 minutes or so, that's dry enough to rotate in the press, and I can paint the next edge. Under normal circumstances, you'd be right, Willow. Dunking books into a vat of goo is usually a bad idea, but I'll take steps to ensure their survival. I've cut these pieces of wood to the same size as the text blocks, and I've covered the edges with plastic tape. The tape is there to keep any moisture from seeping into the wood, or, in this case, particle board. These get clamped tightly to the book with enough pressure to minimize absorption. The book only needs to come into contact with the marbling bath for an instant, and I'll blot off the excess immediately. Just in case, I'll use cabinet maker's clamps with longer jaws to put extra pressure right at the foredge where it's needed. If I can't move the pages at the corners, then I know I've got enough pressure. A solution of alum now gets sponged onto the page edges. This is a mordant, which is a fixative, without which the paint would easily rub off. I apply an even coat and then set each book aside to dry for a short time.
Putting the mordant on there actually pulled some of the paint off of Project Hail Mary, which is the opposite of what it's supposed to do. But hopefully with that on there now, I can reapply another layer of paint and it'll help it stick even better, so fingers crossed.
Thankfully that seems to have worked, and the base color is staying right where it's supposed to be. While that dries, I can start throwing some paint. First up is the Martian. Let's see if I can match the pattern from the end papers. As there's still plenty of paint on the bath, I'll make a quick print of what's left over. Waste not, want not. Back in the bindery, I'm going to wax and burnish the marbled edges, just as I did with the end papers. Doing so will add a nice luster to the foredges, and it gives the pattern a bit of protection as well. I'll start with the first pass using very light pressure, just to even out any irregularities. I'll use the microcrystalline wax on all 3 books, and I'm brushing it on to make sure that I get even coverage. It goes on like a paste, and when it dries, I'll burnish again, this time with increased pressure. A final buff with a soft cloth really brings up the shine. That completes the edge decoration, but the process has left all the pages stuck together. Luckily, that's not permanent, and dealing with it is arguably the most satisfying part of the process. The coatings of paint and wax are very thin, so all it should take is to flex the text blocks to release the pages. Unfortunately, it didn't quite release all of them, so I'll go through and separate them one at a time, which is far less satisfying. Well, it was quite the undertaking, but those text blocks are now basically done, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. I've still got a little bit of work to do to get the spines ready for casing in, but that can wait for the time being. What I need to do now is switch over to making the cases. The cover designs are what's really going to make or break this project, so I'm going to turn my attention to that now, and hopefully I can come up with something that will live up to what I've done here.
Next time in part 2 of Project Hail Andy.
I've got good news and I've got bad news.